Hello everybody. We're ready for our next session titled Photographic Anomalies, Is It or Isn't It? By Jason Clyburn of the Prodigy Paranormal Group. Everybody give him a pecan welcome.
Hey folks, how's it going today? You've probably seen my face too many times up here announcing and saying, hey, if you need anything, let me know. Well, I'm doing something a little different now. In my spare time, I'm the manager of a camera store, own my own photography company, and I teach photography. Now, one of the things that I see with paranormal investigations is when people go to review evidence, one of the most fallible pieces of equipment that you can use are either your camera or your camcorder. And that's for a lot of reasons. A lot of times when you buy a camcorder, buy a camera, the question you ask the salesman is, what's easy to use? Not, how can I use the camera? And that's one of the issues that a lot of paranormal investigators have, is that when they go out with their camera, they're simply pointing and shooting, or pointing and recording, and what happens is they're not aware of the science that's behind the device they're using. And that's what I'm here to do today, is give you a little bit of insight on some of the science and some of the technology that's used with a camera or camcorder, because everything I'm talking about today is going to be kind of a crossover. You can use it for either still or moving pictures. Now, this is going to be a very interactive speech today. It's more of a workshop, so if I call on you, don't get pissed and run out. I'm going to go ahead and just point fingers and throw stuff. No. Actually, feel free to interject anytime you want to. If you have any questions, just save it for the end of the program. We'd be glad to help. Now, start off with, yes, it is photographic anomalies. Is it or isn't it? That's the question. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of information on how to identify everyday anomalies in your photographs that can be mistaken as paranormal. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get into the first slide here. And that basically just says what I just told you. Identifying everyday anomalies that occur in photographs can be mistaken for paranormal. First thing I want to talk about is shutter speed. Now, in most cases, when you're on an investigation, you're using your flash, which does speed up your shutter speeds. However, when you get into more sophisticated cameras, such as an SLR, something you change lenses on, what happens is that the camera gets a little bit less user-friendly. You can keep it in auto mode, but that's not what you want. You want to get results. So what happens is that with an SLR, again, something like David back here, he's a co-founder of the Prodigy Group. If everyone wants to turn around and say hi to Dave and give him a nice wave, he happens to have one of those in his hand right now. And what happens is you need to be more specific on what you're telling the camera that you want it to record. It's not just simply pointing and clicking anymore. There are certain things that have to be taken into consideration, and one is shutter speed. Now, in the image I show here, it's a picture of a campfire, and we see that the flames are kicking, and we see the little embers flying up, and we see the streaks and the smears that's caused by slow shutter speed. Now, let's think about it for a second. With a slow shutter speed, when do we have slow shutter speeds? Well, let's see, where's the clicker? Slow shutter speeds occur when you have low light. And in most investigations, you have low light. The problem with shooting pictures in low light is this. If you use your flash, a pop-up flash, you're limited to how much range your flash actually covers. So what happens is that your flash fires and everything within 10, 12 feet of you is illuminated. Anything past there is dark. So that makes that picture fallible. Things close to you look brighter, things farther away look dark. So what happens is you don't know how close something in the picture is to you. Something in the far distance where your light is dissipating is going to look darker than, say, for instance, between me and the front row of guest speakers. Oh, I'm sorry, the ghost speakers here, the guests here. Anyway, so what happens is things closer to you look more bright, they're more illuminated. Things farther away are darker. So there's just no, unless you have everything documented from every other angle by video, by witness. There's just no means of telling in your photographs after the fact how close you were to an anomaly that happened in your photograph. So, unless it's a ghost standing right up here with a sign saying, "Look at me, I'm a ghost," and it's in your picture, you can't jump to conclusions. So, talking about shutter speed a little bit more. What happens is your shutter, what happens is you hit the shutter button on your camera. Your mirror box opens, and either your digital sensor or if you're shooting film still is now exposed to light. And this is the key. Lighting is your key. What happens is when your shutter is open and you're collecting an exposure, collecting an image, what happens is that shutter stays open until it gets enough light to properly expose an image. So what happens? Does anyone here, right here, anywhere, have children that play sports in a gymnasium? All right, right in the back. What happens is in a gymnasium, the shutter stays open longer to gather more light. The child runs, they're blurry. Same thing is going to happen with different aspects on your investigation too. You take pictures, if it's a low light situation, your shutter and your flash either A, don't synchronize, or B, because you don't know the camera well enough, what happens is that the flash doesn't fire at all. So you have to be careful because lighting is your key to getting the correct exposure and giving you the correct shutter speed. If you don't have enough lighting, the shutter will drag or it will have a slow shutter speed, and you'll get, let's see what I have here. I'm going to skip around in this PowerPoint just a little bit here. All right. Like I said, this is going to be very interactive, so I'm going to walk around here. All right, here, we see this image of a sailboat. This is in St. Augustine, Florida. And we see this line right here. Does anybody know what that might be? Bird. On the back. Like a bird. Well, that's just it. It could be one of two things. One of two things this could be. One, it could be a very slow shutter speed with a bird. Now, if it was a bird, yes, it would look like, has anyone ever heard the term bar? Bars in their pictures? Paranormal bars? This is where the term paranormal bar actually originated from. It looks like a bar in the sky. It's because of a slow shutter speed with a fast-moving object. So what happens is, without knowing what shutter speed versus exposure does to your images, this here would definitely look like something, wow, what's that in the sky? That doesn't look normal. Hence the term paranormal. Now, let's skip around here just a little bit. Another thing, too, is I call it the digital deception. What happens is these sensors are right behind your shutter in your camera. You have a shutter curtain, and then you're going to have these sensors. These sensors are what replaced your 35 millimeter film. Of course, you have CMOS and CCD, and then you have the Foton X3, which is generally a Sigma-specific thing. But what happens is, have you ever turned your TV screen off and on and it has a static clang or a static charge? Same thing happens with digital sensors. So what happens is, you turn your camera on, these sensors are now charged. If you have a camera that exchanges lenses, it's going to act like a magnet for dust. So what happens is that, let's see, where's my bar at? Sorry for the delay here. So that bar, now I know it's a bar because I shot the picture. But what happens is, with that digital sensor, when it does collect dust, what's going to happen is you're going to see little dark spots in your images very similar to this. It usually looks like a round dot. It's usually gray, slightly translucent, not real solid unless it's a real big chunk of nasty dirt. Like say if you go to the beach and you get sanded, and you get sand in your camera. Okay, now that we're back on track and I'm back on topic, because the position of light is always interesting as well. It's always interesting as well because what happens is, in this picture here, we see, ooh, look, it's an orb. It's actually a solar, in this case, a lunar flare. Now your lens, regardless if it's a point and shoot camera or if it's an SLR, each lens has more than one piece of glass. It's not just a piece of glass on the front of the lens. It's not just a piece of glass on the back of the lens. There's several optics involved in your lenses. So what happens is when light enters the lens at a certain angle, and it's all about the angle or position of the lighting, you can get what's called solar or lunar flares that look like round orbs. And as you see, it's right in line with the moon in this image here. And more dominantly, you get them in daylight. And there's a simple way to fix that too. It's called a lens hood. Bear with me for just a second. I'm going to grab a prop. I'm going to show it to everybody here. And everybody who's paying attention is going to get a free prize today. It's going to help you with your photographs. So give me just a sec. All right, folks, this is what a lens hood looks like. You've probably seen one 100 times, 1,000 times, even more. They go on the front of your lens to stop the solar, or in this case, lunar flare from happening. They're in different shapes, and they're for different purposes. Usually the scalloped or tulip shape, as you see here, is going to be for a lens that has some wide angle and some telephoto. If they're all telephoto, it'll be solid all the way through. So you want to make sure you use the proper type of lens hood. Just real quick, can anybody hear me without the microphone? Can anybody hear me okay without the microphone? I'd like to step away from it for just a sec here. Now, while we're talking about orbs, now I'm going to get to orbs more here in just a sec, but one thing I really like to discuss about orbs is that I see them every day in photo finishing. People bring their images into me and say, I need enlargements. I'm going to have these dust balls in my picture. Oh, did I say the bad words? Dust balls? Because usually that's what they are. The orbs, the reason I'm stepping away from the mic is because I'm very adamant about this. Orbs, yeah, I'm going to say it, are not ghosts. I'm not going to say it's not impossible for them to be ghosts, but from my experience in the field is that there's always been orbs, and they're very easily explained. As you see my camera here, most flashes are not this far away from the camera. They're a lot closer to the lens. And what happens is, and I'm going to go ahead and step forward into slides here. What happens is you get what's called flash phenomena. Position of the flash versus the lens. If your lens and your flash are right on top of each other, any kind of airborne dust particle, whether it's moisture, airborne dust, whatever the case may be, that's posing for you. Your flash is directly in line with your lens and whatever dust is in front of your camera, so you're going to get reflection. And I always hear this argument, why are my orbs different colors? Then explain that, Mr. Cameraman. Well, there's a couple different reasons here. Let's see here. First, let's go ahead and talk about flash. If you diffuse your flash, does anybody here know what the word diffuse means? Anybody? Just say it. Yeah. All right. What's it mean?
That's when you put a cover.
Right. It softens and diffuses your flash. So what happens is your flash range is cut in half in most cases. But what happens is the light is much softer. It's more pleasing to skin tones. So therefore, you have less orbs in your pictures. If you actually raise your flash higher from your lens and you diffuse, and most types of flashes like these either A, come with a cap that diffuses, or they have a diffusion device built in, what's going to happen is that's going to cut the range of your flash, but you have less orbs in your pictures because you're raising the flash away from the lens and you're making the light more soft. Okay? Now, flash phenomena is what happens when your flash and your lens are too close and you get these unwanted reflections in your images. Size of flash. You ever noticed the smaller point-and-shoot cameras, the flash are real close to the lens, and then the flash is real tiny. Well, the size of the flash isn't really going to determine how many orbs you get, but it's going to determine the amount of area that's covered in your images. So what happens, all right, where to put it, is part of your image gets darkened out if you go vertical. The flash isn't made to cover that type of area. It's not a vertical shot. It's more for some people call a landscape shot or horizontal. But the main question is color of orbs. Why do they have different colors? Anyone here own a camera? You ever looked in your lens and twisted the lens? Each piece of glass in your lens is a multi-coated piece of optics. Now what the multi-coatings do? What do? They have different functions. One is it protects from UV damage internally on your camera. Secondly, it helps prolong the life of the actual optics. Optics, believe it or not, whether they be Bushnell binoculars or they be night scopes or rifle scopes or camera lenses, well, they're a horrible, horrible harbinger of moisture. And what happens is, over time, because the daylight traveling through your lens, mold starts to grow in your lens. And that's what these multi-coatings do. They protect from these elemental attacks. So what happens is, at different focal lengths, at different angles of the way the light penetrates the lens, emulates the different colors of orbs. And anybody who wants to come look through my lens after I'm done here, come on up. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. I'll be glad to. But that is the biggest culprit. I've heard guest speakers at other conferences say, oh, wow, this one here is red. That's a demon. This one here, oh, it's more white. So it's an angel. Well, this one here is green. It must be a goblin, right? Well, I don't think so. If you look through the lens and arm yourself, you don't have to go to take a camera class. You don't have to go to college for photography. Just go to the local library, check out a book, and what's going to happen is all that information is right there. It's right there in the book. Any basic photography book will cover that. Well, most. Any basic photography book I have in my library does, but regardless, that answers the question of why are orbs different colors. Another thing that has effect on orb color too is ambient light in the room that you're shooting in. If you're in a room that is completely dark, majority of your images, because your flash is daylight correct, are probably going to be white or haloed in a white glow. It's because of the light that's used. If you're in a building that has heavy tungsten lighting, like a gymnasium, an auditorium, or say, for instance, a church, well, I don't care who you are or how fickle you are about housekeeping, if you have air-forced heat or air, you're going to have dust particles, or at least airborne dust particles, floating around. So the lighting situation, too, may have a slight impact on the actual color that the orbs may appear. Tungsten is a warmer tone than daylight. And to back up this dissect here, photography is based around daylight equivalent temperatures. If you ever notice, you usually get your best pictures outside because the camera is designed to do that. So what happens is, you get inside, you have to tell your camera what kind of light you're shooting with, unless you're using flash all the time. So what happens is, if the building is tungsten, it emulates more of a orange or yellowish, warmer glow in your images. Anybody here who has children in the family that played sports in a gym, their gym pictures are normally probably a little yellow or maybe a little orange. That's why. Fluorescent tubes tend to emulate more of a greener or bluish tint in your pictures because fluorescent tubes are actually cooler. They're equivalent than daylight equivalent temperatures. So we have to, again, tell the camera what kind of light are we shooting with. And again, this is if we're not using flash. And that's going to be based around, everybody's probably seen it on your digital camera, the little two letters, WB, stands for white balance. Now with film cameras, we would adjust the balance by using a gray card or 18% gray card or a white card to tell our camera what kind of color shift we're trying to correct for. Pardon me. So what happens with digital, you can still do those things, but it's much easier to go into the WB mode, the white balance mode, and tell the camera what kind of light you're shooting at. That way you can get away from seeing the green goblins and the demons and the angels. And I'm sure, this one's blue, so that must be Frosty, right? Frosty the Orb Man? Okay. Now, one other thing I would like to talk about is infrared. Now, a lot of times, I'll go back to the podium for this. A lot of times with infrared, what happens is two things. One, folks get excited about using infrared because it's something they don't normally use. You see these folks on TV or read out of somebody's book, I used infrared on this investigation. This is the kind of result that I got. Well, infrared resorts back to one thing: shutter speeds. Oh, the other thing too usually arises with infrared is if you're film shooters, you have to know how to store it. It can't just sit on the shelf. It has to be refrigerated, and it has to be refrigerated during, like say for instance, if you go on eBay and buy some infrared film, I can guarantee they're not refrigerating it during a transfer, so it's fallible completely. With those two things being said, the biggest problem you have with infrared is shutter speeds. Because with infrared, you're not using a flash, because a flash will, remember we talked about white balance and color shifts? What happens is, with infrared, you get the same thing. If you use a flash, you get a color shift. If you shoot during daylight, it's not true infrared anymore, it's more like in infra pink. It's more of a real pale pinkish tone. So true infrared can really only be shot at night. So with what I've told you here, can anybody tell me, what do you get at night when you can't use a flash? Slow shutter speeds. So what happens is see everything in the background? And this is what I call infra pink. It's not exactly red. It's because I shot it during daylight hours to try to get a faster shutter speed. At night, I tried the same shot. No, doesn't work. If you notice, the cars in the background, nice and sharp and in focus. See the car that's in the front that's blurry? That car is traveling, that's my coworker's car. It is traveling about 2-point-something odd miles per hour. And I was a good 25 feet away from it. And that's with bright daylight using, let's see, standard infrared film. So what happens is you get slow shutter speeds, even in broad daylight. So what happens when you get into a dark situation like an attic or a basement or a cemetery at 2:30 in the morning? Unless these ghosts are standing still posing for you and they're really patient, anything you shoot with infrared is going to be blurry to some degree. Now, if you're taking record shots down a hallway, in a basement or an attic like I mentioned, again, I'm sorry, but it's going to be fallible, because if anything does move, it's going to be blurry, and you're going to wonder, is this paranormal or is it accidental? So in summary, we've talked about shutter speed, light and use of light. One thing I want to mention too is be judgmental. The last thing we want to do is when we look at our evidence, whether it be pictures, video, listen to EVPs, whatever the case may be, we want to look at this evidence as if it wasn't ours. We don't want to jump to conclusions and I consider them customers or clients. If someone calls the Prodigy Paranormal Group and says, I need your help, I think my house is haunted, I'm not going to rush in and say, oh yeah, you got some crazy stuff going on. We're going to help them out. We're going to try to debunk and find the true meanings of behind what's going on. Same thing with when you review your evidence. You have to be judgmental, no matter how close a friend you are with a teammate or a colleague that's helping out on an investigation. You have to be judgmental and let them know, I don't think that's what it is. Let's get a third set of eyes. Now, I think I have one more slide here. And there's a puppy lover in the audience today. This is just for you. And I could keep going on and on and on and on and on and on about how photography can be used in paranormal investigations, ghost hunting, so on and so forth, but we'd be here till tomorrow. So on that note, if anybody has any questions, feel free to let me know. You can talk to me here, you can talk to me there, you can talk to me anywhere. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and end my presentation. So if you have any questions, just let me know.